Hey everyone, welcome back to Oz Movie Recap. Conor McGregor stars in this wild action-packed movie, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. The story centers around a former UFC middleweight fighter who's suddenly offered a job as a bouncer at a roadside bar. At first, it seems like just a regular gig. Watch the door, keep the peace. Easy, right? But things quickly take a dark turn. Turns out, the people he has to deal with aren't just drunk troublemakers. They're connected to one of the most ruthless mafia groups in the region. And now the big question is, can this ex-fighter survive and take them down? Let's jump into the story and find out. The story begins with a restaurant owner named Frankie who shows up at an illegal underground fight. Her mission? To find a tough female fighter she can recruit for her business. There, Frankie spots a fighter who's never lost a single match. His name is Carter. But just as things are heating up, something unexpected happens. A mysterious man in a worn-out jacket quietly steps into the ring. Without saying a word, he gets ready to challenge Carter. At first, Carter and the crowd can't stop laughing. They think this guy's got a death wish. But the moment he takes off his jacket, the whole place goes dead silent. That's when everyone realizes he's Elwood Dalton, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, a former UFC middleweight fighter, and clearly not someone to underestimate. Knowing he didn't stand a chance, Carter backed off. He gave up just like that and let Dalton take the win. After pocketing the prize money, Dalton casually walked back to his car. But on the way, a thug showed up and stabbed him in the stomach. The guy was there to collect a debt, demanding Dalton to pay up. But the moment he saw Dalton's face turn cold and serious, he panicked. He backed off immediately, realizing it was smarter to run than to die at Dalton's hands. As Dalton tried to patch himself up, Frankie suddenly showed up. She offered Dalton a job as a bodyguard at her business, a bar located near a local racetrack, known for being wild and messy at night. Frankie explained that fights broke out almost every night at the bar, so she was offering big money, around $5,000 a week, to cover the risk. But Dalton turned her down. He said he'd rather start a small food business, selling something sweet and chewy, like rice cakes. Even though Dalton rejected the offer, Frankie still handed him the address to the bar, just in case he changed his mind. After treating his wound, Dalton fell asleep in his car. Turns out he was living out of his vehicle, homeless and broken, haunted by a painful past. He was later woken up by a female cop who told him he couldn't sleep by the roadside. That moment triggered something inside him. All the sadness, the regrets, and the weight of his past came rushing in. As he drove away, his mind spiraled deeper into the darkness. At one point, he even thought of ending it all by letting his car get hit by an oncoming train. But in those final seconds, he had a change of heart. He remembered the offer from Frankie. Maybe working at that bar, Roadhouse, could be his second chance. Dalton swerved just in time, barely escaping what could have been the end. The next morning, he arrived at his destination. Frankie's bar was located in Florida, in a small town called Glass Key. Dalton got off at a small local bus terminal, where he met a young woman named Charlie, who ran a bookstore with her father, Stephen. Charlie handed him a book about the history of Glass Key and pointed out that Roadhouse wasn't far from where they were. Dalton thanked her, then made his way to the bar. And as soon as he arrived, he felt something strange, a sense of peace. With a faint smile, he told the staff that this place felt calm and safe. But that calm wouldn't last long. As night fell and the bar started to fill up, chaos wasn't far behind. A few drunk guests started acting out, stirring up trouble among the crowd. One of the staff members, a guy named Billy, jumped in quickly, trying to break things up and calm everyone down. Meanwhile, Dalton stood in the corner, watching everything quietly, a calm smile on his face. Then the vibe in the room suddenly shifted. A motorcycle gang rolled in, led by a guy named Dell. Without saying a word, Dell started making a scene. And it didn't take long before fear swept through the bar. According to some locals, Dell's crew was the most feared gang in the area. Seeing Dell push things too far, Dalton finally stepped in. With a calm but firm tone, he warned Dell to cut it out. But Dell wasn't the type to listen, so Dalton walked outside, pretending like he was about to mess with their bikes. Of course, the gang members rushed out after him, ready to stop him. And that's when everything turned into a showdown. Dalton, calm as ever, started taking them down one by one. His fighting skills, sharp, fast, and brutal. In just seconds, every single gang member was knocked out. One of them even suffered a concussion, thanks to a solid punch from Dalton. Even after beating up those troublemakers, Dalton still took responsibility. Without hesitation, he loaded the injured gang members into Frankie's car and drove them straight to the hospital. Later that night, Ellie, one of the workers at the bar, accidentally noticed the stab wound scar on Dalton's stomach. Without saying much, she invited him inside to help treat it. Once patched up, Dalton headed back to Roadhouse. There he received his first paycheck from Frankie, along with a genuine thank you for handling the gang problem. Since it was already late, Frankie suggested Dalton stay at a nearby hotel, but Dalton refused. Instead, he chose to spend the night on an old boat docked near the pier, a rusty ship that used to belong to Frankie. Frankie gave him the green light. While Dalton was cleaning up the old boat, he met the dock manager, an old man named Mr. Hank. Mr. Hank looked downcast. Turned out he had just lost his dog, after it was attacked by one of those crocs. That night, as Dalton lay sleeping on the boat, he drifted into a nightmare, a haunting memory from his past that changed everything. Back then, Dalton had a fierce fight against a former UFC fighter who used to be his friend. But things got ugly when they started throwing personal insults, even dragging each other's parents into it. In that fight, Dalton was nearly defeated, but when his emotions boiled over, he snapped and fought back with brutal force. By the end of the match, his opponent was dead. That's the reason why Dalton decided to walk away from fighting, for good. Ever since then, he's been drifting. No clear direction, no real purpose. The next morning, Dalton was woken up by one of Frankie's staff, Laura. She had come all the way to the pier just to say thank you for standing up to Dell's gang and keeping the bar safe. As a gesture of gratitude, Laura brought him breakfast. Nothing fancy, but warm and thoughtful. After breakfast, Dalton stopped by Charlie's bookstore. He needed to borrow a computer for something personal. Suddenly, while they were inside, Charlie noticed a few of Dell's men causing trouble at the shop next door. Without hesitation, she grabbed a baseball bat and tried to scare them off. But of course, they didn't budge. That is, until they noticed Dalton standing behind her, calm, quiet, with that cold stare in his eyes. No words were needed. The moment they saw him, panic kicked in, and they ran for their lives. Dalton and Charlie sat down for a quiet chat, sharing pieces of their lives with each other. Charlie told him that her mother had passed away, and her father? He had to take on side jobs, because the bookstore alone just wasn't enough to cover their daily needs. Meanwhile, two of Dell's guys headed out to a small yacht anchored offshore. There, they met with their boss, Ben Brandt. They told him the plan to cause chaos at Roadhouse had failed, because the bar now had a new protector, a guy they couldn't lay a finger on, Dalton. Hearing that, Ben lost it. He didn't want excuses, he wanted results. And if it came to it, he wanted Dalton gone, for good. Back in town, Dalton spent his afternoon teaching Billy, showing him some simple techniques to handle unruly guests. And you know what? It worked. Billy was able to take down a guy who had been carrying a knife, without causing a scene. Day by day, Dalton grew closer to the crew at the bar. Aside from Billy, he also became friends with another staff member named Rafe. One afternoon, Dalton ran into Elle at a local diner, right after she had picked up some takeout. They talked for a bit, mostly about how chaotic the town had become. Elle said crime had gotten way out of hand. Even the police couldn't keep things under control anymore. She warned Dalton to be careful while he was staying in town. Later that night, Dalton stopped by to pick up his weekly pay from Frankie. Then he started walking back to the dock. But on the way there, out of nowhere, a car came speeding toward him. Someone tried to run Dalton down. He was thrown off his feet and the car went crashing into the water along with him. The attacker, gone, just like that. Not long after, Dalton made it back to his boat, but he wasn't alone. Dell was already there, waiting in the shadows, armed with a shotgun and clearly ready to kill. Still, Dalton kept his cool. He started talking to Dell, trying to get him to lower his guard. As soon as Dell raised his gun, Dalton moved fast. He kicked it out of Dell's hands and took him down hard. Dell ended up falling into the water, And even though Dell had just tried to kill him, Dalton chose not to finish the fight, because to him, holding on to revenge never leads anywhere good. But just as he tried to help Dell out of the water, a saltwater crocodile suddenly appeared. It grabbed Dell and dragged him down into the dark, murky river. The next morning, Dalton was questioned by local police. After a brief investigation, he was cleared of any wrongdoing in Dell's death. Still, Dell's body was never found. People around there knew those crocs well. They're dangerous, and they often hide their prey deep in places no one can reach. The following day, Ben met up with his trusted men to talk business. It turned out their real plan was to tear down the roadhouse and replace it with a massive entertainment complex. While laying out the next steps, Ben got a call from his father, a powerful mafia boss named Garl, who was currently locked up in prison. But Ben ignored the call. He tossed the phone aside like he wanted nothing to do with the man. Feeling disrespected, Garl didn't waste time. He reached out to his former right-hand man, a ruthless enforcer who had just been released from prison, a man named Knox. Knox had a reputation for being dangerously unpredictable. He didn't hesitate to go to extremes. People hated him, but no one dared to challenge him, because Knox wasn't just a thug. He was a street-born psychopath, and everyone knew it. The next day, Dalton got invited out to sea by Ella, who had just borrowed a fancy boat from her ex-boyfriend. When they reached the open water, Dalton thought Elle might be looking for something, or maybe she had some deeper reason for bringing him there. But nope, Elle just wanted to relax and take some photos. It was a simple escape, a moment to enjoy the quiet before things got messy again. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Knox had stolen a car and returned to his old hangout spot. There he found a few of Ben's guys lounging around, but it didn't take long before he turned the place upside down. By the time Ben arrived, all of his men had already been knocked out cold. Without even blinking, Knox let Ben know he was sent by Ben's father himself to eliminate Dalton, the new guy guarding the roadhouse, and he didn't stop there. Knox also passed along a message from Garl. He was fed up with Ben's failures. If Ben couldn't handle a single bodyguard, then maybe it was time someone else stepped in. Back in town, one of Ben's men made a move. He headed over to Charlie's bookstore, with the cruel intention of setting it on fire just to send a message to Dalton. Meanwhile, after spending time out on the water, Dalton returned to his old boat at the dock. But no sooner had he arrived, two officers approached and asked him to come with them. They said it was just to answer a few questions, but it quickly became clear they weren't taking him to the station. But instead of taking him to the police station, the officers brought Dalton to an old abandoned dock, quiet, empty, clearly off the record. That's where he met the chief of police in Florida, a cold, no-nonsense man named Chief Rourke. Without any small talk, Rourke gave him a warning. Leave town, immediately. Dalton was confused. He asked what he had done wrong. Why was he being pushed out? But Rourke didn't give an answer. Instead, he got aggressive. The tension rose, and it looked like Rourke was ready to end Dalton right then and there. Luckily, before anything could happen, Elle showed up and stopped her father in his tracks. Yep, Chief Rourke was Elle's father. She pulled Dalton away and got him out of there. On the way back, she told him the truth. Her father worked for Garl, Ben's father, the most powerful crime boss in all of Florida. And even though Garl was behind bars, everyone in town knew he still called the shots. He had money, influence, and power, enough to put cops like Rourke on his payroll and silence anyone who got in the way of his plans. Even Dalton. Elle gave Dalton a serious warning. She told him to leave town before it was too late, before he became the next target. But that night, Dalton did the opposite. He went back to the bar, not to work, but to find out what was really going on. There, he came face to face with Ben, and Ben gave it to him straight. Stay out of this. But Dalton refused. He wasn't just going to walk away. Something didn't sit right, and he wasn't about to let this place get taken over without a fight. Frustrated, Ben turned to Knox. Handle it, he said. Without a word, Knox caused chaos. He smashed bottles, hit random guests, and turned the whole bar into a war zone. The chaos sparked a full-blown brawl, and in the middle of it all, Dalton stepped in. He faced Knox one-on-one. But this time, things were different. Dalton was outmatched. Knox hit harder, meaner, more vicious. Dalton quickly realized this guy wasn't just a thug, he was something else entirely. Knowing he couldn't win in that moment, Dalton backed off. Right as the cops arrived and shut everything down. Later that night, covered in cuts and bruises, Dalton cleaned himself up and got ready to leave town for good. He felt like he'd done all he could. But just as he was about to go, Frankie showed up. Frankie finally opened up about why she'd been fighting so hard to keep Roadhouse from being taken over by Ben and his crew. Turns out, that bar wasn't just a business. It was a family legacy. The only thing left that still connected her to her past. Dalton was moved, but he still didn't care. To him, it felt like Frankie had just been using him, putting him in the line of fire against the mafia. So Dalton decided to leave. But just as he got to the bus terminal, he saw thick smoke rising in the distance. Charlie's bookstore was on fire. Moments later, he heard the news. Charlie and her dad were in the hospital. Both had been beaten badly by someone they didn't recognize. Dalton snapped. He canceled his plans to leave and made a promise to himself. He would take care of this personally. He tracked down one of Ben's guys who happened to be cleaning a table at the bar. No words. Dalton just walked up and struck him in the neck. One clean, brutal hit. The guy collapsed into the water and never resurfaced. As Dalton was trying to load the body into a car, another one of Dell's men spotted him. Terrified, the young thug begged for mercy, and then he spilled everything. At 5 a.m. that morning, Ben and Police Chief Rourke were planning an illegal deal down by the beach. So just before sunrise, Dalton was already there, waiting in the shadows, ready for whatever was coming. As one of the cops was seen lifting a large suitcase onto the boat, Dalton quietly walked over and opened it. And what was inside? Stacks of cash, money made from drug sales, run by Ben and Police Chief Rourke. Without hesitation, Dalton hid the money, then shot one of the men involved and took down the cop standing nearby. Later that afternoon, while Dalton was building a homemade bomb on his old boat, Rourke showed up. He told Dalton that Ben had kidnapped Elle. He then made an offer. Hand over the hidden money, and Elle would be released unharmed. Dalton didn't waste time. He borrowed a boat that once belonged to Elle's ex and headed straight toward Ben's yacht. When he got there, Dalton tried to play it cool, throwing in a few words to stall for time. But out of nowhere, Rourke revealed something shocking. Elle had never actually been kidnapped. It was just a setup, Rourke's plan to lure Dalton into their trap. But then things took a wild turn. Turns out, Ben really did kidnap Elle. And that little twist, it made Rourke furious. He realized he was being played too. As tensions rose, they spotted Knox approaching the yacht. Dalton didn't wait. He detonated the bomb he had planted earlier. The explosion caused a breach in the boat. Without wasting a second, Dalton rushed into the cabin to rescue Elle. But then, the glass partition shattered, and both of them were pushed out into the open water. Right then, Ben grabbed Elle and dragged her onto a jet boat, speeding away. Meanwhile, Knox tried to ram Dalton with his boat, but Dalton dodged it and managed to take control of Knox's boat instead. Seeing Dalton still alive, Ben aimed his yacht straight at him. But Dalton was faster. He leaped through the air and landed right on Ben's boat. As the yacht raced toward the Roadhouse dock, Dalton and Elle jumped to safety just in time, while Ben was thrown hard, landing on the rooftop of the Roadhouse. At the same time, Knox swam to a nearby bridge, hijacked a passing car, and sped toward the bar. Back at the Roadhouse, Dalton climbed to the roof and went straight for Ben. No words needed. He just started beating him down, hard. But then, out of nowhere, Knox's stolen car came crashing into them both. And just like that, the final showdown began. Dalton versus Knox, round 2. The two went all out, trading punches, kicks, and every fighting skill they had. At one point, Dalton even tried locking Knox in a move that looked like something straight out of Khabib Nurmagomedov's playbook. But let's face it, Dalton's not Khabib. Knox broke free, then grabbed a sharp wooden plank from the rubble and struck back hard. With Dalton on the ground, barely able to move, Ben stepped in and told Knox to finish him off. But Knox had had enough of Ben. Without a second thought, he turned around and killed Ben instead. Then he went right back to Dalton, charging at him with that same piece of wood. But Dalton wasn't done yet. He caught the attack mid-swing, flipped the momentum, and with everything he had left, turned the tide. He used the same weapon against Knox and finally took him down for good. It was over. After everything, Chief Rourke and Elle told Dalton he had to leave town, because if he stayed, he could end up behind bars, even though he was only defending himself. Later, as Dalton waited for his bus out of town, Charlie showed up. She looked calm, relieved. She thanked Dalton, because for the first time in a long while, this town finally felt safe. Elsewhere, Charlie's dad, Stephen, walked into their burned-out bookstore and found something unexpected, a suitcase packed with cash. Dalton had hidden the money there, so they could rebuild the bookstore and start again. With that, Dalton left Glasskey behind. He didn't say goodbye, he just walked away, quietly. But the town, it had hope again. The gangs, the corruption, the violence, all gone, thanks to him. But just when you think it's really over, we cut to a hospital room. Knox is alive, hooked up to machines, badly injured. But those eyes, still burning with rage. This fight isn't over, he'll be back. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you in the next video.